One of the most popular videos I had last year was about the beneficial or health benefits of sunlight. And ever since I wanted to make a video describing on a molecular level exactly why that's beneficial. So what does light actually do biologically to us down on atomic level that it brings us benefits? And we're going to be talking about today, and I gotta tell you, we're going to go super atomic. We're going to go down to quantum levels. So I'm going to give you quite a bit of a background, so you have to bear with me. This is not going to be a very short video. We're going to be talking about electrons and how electrons, which have electric charge, can influence on a microscopic level electric charge distribution wherever they are present, because electron can move around. They can be shared between atoms and they can move around. And how light also plays role in all of this, especially near infrared light. So we're gonna get down through all of these details. My name is Dr. Mikola Rashik of Genomics, but first I also wanted to let you know that this video is sponsored. It's sponsored by a company from China called Flickies. And incredibly enough, this company produces actually photobiomodulation devices, so devices that put out different light outputs, including red and near infrared light. And later on in the video, I'll show you the device. We'll put in a clip of another video. I've been using this device already for a while, but because of how I work with sponsors, my rules are I want to talk about the science behind the technology that I promote. And of course, look, it's been a long time since I agreed to have another sponsor, and I actually get tons and tons of sponsorship opportunities. The thing is that it has to be something that I'm really interested in, and this concept, this science, I'm very interested in, and I'm also interested in the technology. So if you're interested in such a device, the discount to purchase the device is in the video description below, so check that out. And one of the things when I studied for this video, one thing that really stood out to me is that this type of technology, this near infrared light, could be very beneficial, especially people who might have chronic fatigue issues, such as chronic fatigue syndrome, or perhaps people with long COVID or post-vaccination syndrome. And even though this is not verified, you'll see why I was particularly interested in this. But before I give you background and how it all works, let me explain to you how near infrared light is already used in medicine. So this is not some abstract concept we're going to be discussing. This has been already well worked out for over many decades. Now, in near infrared light, its beneficial effects have been studied for a very long time, but it's only in the last few decades that the molecular biology of it has been worked out. And in terms of how it's used in medicine, the area that is probably most verified, has the strongest evidence, is for a condition that I think it's called something like oral mucositis. And whenever you hear, I hope I get the name right, whenever you hear the word itis, it means inflammation of something. So in this case, we're talking about inflammation of the gums. And this is used especially in oncology, because certain chemotherapies can cause those effects. And here, not only have we had already clinical trials, so all of these conditions I'm about to tell you, they've already had randomized clinical trials support this. They already had FDA approved devices. And what that really means is that if you want to have FDA approval for a device, it means that device, of course, has to be proven that it can be effective and that it can be safe. In terms of this use in oncology, the reason why I said it has the strongest evidence is because not only do you have the clinical trials, you even have guidelines already established on how it's supposed to be used. The second one I'm going to mention is in muscle pain management. Again, very strong evidence. This is especially used in physiotherapy. Third one down the ladder, I'm going to talk about wound healing. Once again, strong evidence by now, many clinical trials, FDA approved devices. And here we're talking about it is used in hospitals as well, for example, diabetic ulcers, but also I believe in dentistry. That's where you can see its application. And the last one I'll mention, fourth on the list, that's one surprised me the most. It's for hair regrowth, so for dealing with loss of hair. That one I was really surprised. So there's numerous clinical trials showing that you can increase the hair density, and again there's FDA approved devices for that purpose as well. But again, I mentioned, check out for the purpose of this video, the area that I was especially interested in was how it might help with fatigue, although this is just starting to be tested. But molecularly, in terms of the benefit of near-infrared light, what I'm going to tell you in this video has been the best established as far as I understand. All right, so let me give you a quick background. So what is light? Obviously, light is a spectrum of different wavelengths. So there's UV light, then there's visible light, and it goes from like blue all the way to red, and then from red, which is the light we're interested in, it transforms to near infrared, the one that is most beneficial biologically to us. All right, but light is a bit of an abstract concept. Light itself is made out of pockets of energy called photons. And what are photons? Basically, think of it like it's a cloud of energy, and the best you can do is estimate probability distribution of how that energy is distributed in that cloud. But it has a wave function as well, and how different light has different wavelengths, it will carry different amount of energy. So as you change the spectrum of light, and you change the wavelength, you can carry the different amount of energy. And because there's a distribution of energy, these photons that carry a very specific concrete amount of energy, depending on how they interact with matter, it will depend what happens with the photons. So photons, they travel at the speed of light. They can travel indefinitely. This is why we can see stars from billions of years ago, because that's how long light can travel. But as light travels, these photons can interact with matter, and multiple things can happen when photons encounter matter. Number one, they can just pass right through. Number two, it can be completely absorbed. And if a photon is absorbed, it cannot be partially absorbed. It's completely absorbed. It's all or nothing event. And that can, of course, impact biologically what happens to the atoms that encountered and say absorb the photons. And the last thing that can happen is that these photons can be scattered. And that means is that they will change direction and nothing happens to them. They just change direction, or they can impact impart slow amount of energy to the matter. And as a consequence, you can change the wavelength of the photon as well. So that's scattering. Okay, now in terms of, that's in a nutshell the background on light. So in terms of light being used for health benefits, that's referred to as photobiomodulation. That's been discovered more than 50 years ago. But at the time it was called something else. It was called low laser therapy, I believe. And the reason why is because the very first form of light that was used for these therapeutic purposes were from lasers. There were like ruby lasers and I believe helium and neon lasers, both in the red light spectrum. And by the way, red light is somewhere like 600 to 700 nanometers. Infrared is 770 to 1200. Now, what happened to this gap? Well, that gap between 700 and 770, that wavelength of light has the least biological impact, so we just ignore it. All right. Now within that spectrum of red and near infrared, light is absorbed by our body to different degrees. So for example, we can also absorb blue light. Blue light doesn't penetrate deeply. It's very quickly can be either absorbed or scattered and so on. Red and near infrared can go deeper, but the sweet spot, the wavelength that goes the deepest is 810 nanometers. So that's near infrared light. And the reason why that one is particularly powerful and why it can go deepest is because it's least absorbed by molecules, and the molecules that can absorb light are melanin or hemoglobin, and that wavelength is least absorbed by these molecules, and that wavelength is least scattered. So what scatters it? There's fibers, there's different molecules, there's cellular components, and they all can affect light. They can all interact with light and just bounce it around, type of thing. So this wavelength is referred to as therapeutic window because it can go deepest. Now, hence the greatest interest is typically in around these wavelengths. Now, if you go over 900 nanometers and more, you lose therapeutic benefits, and the reason why is because that's when water starts to absorb light. Different effects can happen to water, but I'll talk about that potentially in another video. So hence, because we're mostly made out of water, then you can imagine that at that point, this light is not gonna go far anyway, right? Hence, that the light that we're most interested in would be red and near infrared. Blue light can also have interesting biological effects, but that's again topic for a completely different video. All right, so that is what has been discovered in terms of photobiomodulation and how it works. And the studies show that the benefits is biphasic. What does that mean? Is that when you use light, when you interact with light, as light, and I should tell you what is the benefit. I should have told you right away. The benefit of red and near infrared is the fact that it can influence how your mitochondria functions. So that's the secret sauce here, and we'll get into crazy details here as to what are the benefits, how exactly it does that, but it is the mitochondria that ultimately is where the light has most effect that we're going to be discussing. So, but it is biphasic, and the reason why is because as you start being exposed to something like near infrared light, you get benefits, your cells are happy, your cells are absorbing it, your mitochondria is performing better. But eventually, if you keep getting exposed to this light, you plateau and you no longer receive benefits. And then if you continue the exposure, eventually you can even start seeing negative effects because you can start stressing the system. So how much exposure you get, how much energy exposure you get matters. Again, we're not going to go into this in this video. I can just briefly tell you that when I started looking at some of the clinical trials, I think the energy amounts that were studied were ranged between 10 to 100 joules per centimeter squared. So that's important. You cannot just capture and be exposed to near infrared light for forever and ever and ever, because eventually you can start introducing negative effects. And the reason why is because you can literally start stressing mitochondria, and it can cause oxidative stress. So that's the background on photobiomodulation. Now is probably the good time to introduce the video that shows you the device that red near infrared and red and blue light device that is the company that makes it is a sponsor of this video. This is the unit from Frikis. the company Fleekies, and you can see all of the LED lamps right here. This particular unit that I received has two light outputs, both blue and red and infrared. So these are divided into two alternating rows that put out different light, and I'll show you that at night. This is their smallest unit. It's quite heavy though. It's very sturdy. This is, you can see it's really solid construction. That was the first thing I noticed that impressed me really well, that it looks really sturdy, very solid, very simple to use. There's literally just 3 buttons. So this sets the time, and you have variation of time allowed, and this is the intensity, and you can go up to 30 minutes. So, and you can change it for every 5-minute increments, and this is different 5 power outputs. And then of course there's your turn on, and then you select lights here. You can have both the red and near infrared together, but blue has to be done separately. So let me show you what this looks like at night. I'm gonna use these protective glasses that came with the unit, and there is a button in the back, power button, very easy. And since I have everything pre-programmed, I just turn it on, and you can see these are both the red and near infrared wavelengths right now showing up, and I'm going to switch it to blue light right now, and you can see the difference, how it looks between one versus the other. Okay, I can also tell you that this is a very powerful device, and I use it only for 5 minutes because based on my calculations, this is the smallest unit, and with 6 inches away from the device, I believe you might be getting something like 10 joules of energy exposure per centimeter squared within literally seconds. Based on my calculations, that might have been something around 70 seconds. And as you go further away from this device, you increase the area of exposure, because obviously the light spreads, but you will get less intensity. So for example, if you move 2 feet away from it, then in order to get 10 joules of exposure, that might take something equivalent to maybe 2.5 minutes. So because of the studies I've looked so far, range somewhere around 10 to maybe 100 joules. For now, I only do 5 minutes at a time, just till I get more background knowledge on this. And what I typically do is I stretch. All right, so now we're back, and now we're going to start going into molecular details as to why infrared is beneficial to you and is beneficial to the mitochondria. And I have to give you a big background on this to really explain this on atomic level. So electrons are the heroes of this story. So electrons are the big deal here. So what are electrons? Electrons, they are part of all atoms. So atoms have a nucleus, and around the nucleus you have electrons floating around, and electrons they actually have mass. They're similar to photons in that they are particles, but they have that wave function behavior as well, so that again, where the electrons are found around atom is more like a probability distribution than being able to capture an electron type of thing. But they do have a mass, and they have a negative charge. Okay, so this is key. So and electrons can travel. They can move between atoms, and they can also they can be moved around. And because they have charge, where they go, they will start affecting electrostatic charge around them. They will start on a microscopic level. They're going to start affecting the charge around them. And this is the key to this story, because as far as I'm concerned, there's a couple aspects of molecular world, or our world, that governs what happens in the world, and that is the three-dimensional shape of things and the electric charge distribution on the surface of that three-dimensional shape. And if electron enters that given three-dimensional shape with its specific electric charge, it can influence that charge, and that can alter the electric charge distribution on that shape. And that can be so powerful because everything interacts with each other via electric interactions. It can cause things to move, okay? It can cause things to change shape. This is why proteins can act like robots even, where they can perform movement, because in essence, you can alter what happens to them electrically, and that electric change to their shape can cause movement. So you can create life that way by creating movement on a molecular level, on protein level, and then you keep building that up. You can create living cells and so on, and suddenly you have living things. But it all comes down to the electric distribution on the atomic level. So where do these electrons come from that will be doing this? They come from our food. So when we eat food, such as say carbohydrates, proteins, and fats or lipids, they're broken down, and food is made out of carbons, and carbons have hydrogens attached to them. And what happens is you can rip off these hydrogen atoms from the carbon and steal electrons from them. So hydrogen atoms are neutral. When you steal an electron from them, what really happens is they become positively charged, and they become ions. When hydrogen atoms have charge, they are referred to as ions, or any atom that has charge is referred to as ion, and they can also be called protons. All right, and then you have that electron available, and that's what matters the most. You want to capture these electrons from food by breaking down the carbon bonds of your food molecules that we consume and stripping away these hydrogen atoms and stealing these electrons. And these electrons are captured by these chemicals called NADH or FADH2. And these are transport chemicals. They are transport molecules that will transport electron into the mitochondria. And once they are in the mitochondria, this is where magic happens. Mitochondria are known to produce energy. Mitochondria are more powerful than just producing energy, but they produce these energy molecules called ATPs. I believe they're called adenosine triphosphate. And these are the molecules that we need to live, because they're like energy molecules that we need for doing all of our activity. And that's mitochondria. Check out my past videos on mitochondria as to why they are so biologically powerful and important. And inside mitochondria have two membranes. Membranes are made out of lipids. Remember, those are the fatty molecules. On one side of the fatty molecule can handle water, can interact with water, but the inside is fat-loving, so you create a membrane. And mitochondria have two membranes. It has inner membrane and outer membrane. So outer membrane is, of course, the outside, and it has another membrane inside. So it has like as if it had a separate little organelle inside itself. And inside that inner membrane is what is referred to as electron transport chain. And this is a fascinating thing. That's where these electrons that were taken from food are put into that electron transport chain, and that's what you need to create those energy molecules. So electron transport chain is made out of 4 complexes called complex 1, 2, 3, and 4. So these are protein complexes. Let me tell you first about complex 1. Complex 1 is the entry point for that NADH transport molecule to bring electron, okay? Then that complex passes it on to another electron transporter molecule called coenzyme Q. Now, coenzyme Q, once it grabs an electron, it can also be called ubiquinol. It's fat soluble, so it can literally swim through that inner membrane, fatty part of that inner mitochondrial membrane, to the next complex, which would be complex 3, and pass it on to another molecule called cytochrome C. But then you're gonna be asking, like, well, what the heck? What happened to complex 2? Well, complex 2 is an entry point for these electrons for those FADH2 molecules. So same thing, FADH2 comes in there, passes it on electron to that complex, and then complex passes it on to coenzyme Q. Now, by the way, within these complexes, how do they capture electron? They have metal ions in there, and metal ions are positively charged, so they can grab the electron and hold it in that space right there. So both complex 1, 2, 3, and 4 have metal ions in their center, and they can hold the electron until it's passed on to the next transporter molecule. Then coenzyme Q brings it to third complex, complex number 3. Again, it has metal center, grabs the electrons, and then complex 3 passes it on to cytochrome C. Cytochrome C is now a protein, and it's water soluble, so it travels outside inner mitochondrial membrane and brings the electron finally to the most important complex, complex 4, the hero of our story. This is where the light has its effect. It's also referred to as cytochrome C oxidase. And why? Because that complex takes 4 electrons from 4 cytochrome C molecules and passes it on to the oxygen. The oxygen we breathe, which is 2 oxygen atoms linked together as gas. And oxygen will diffuse, that we breathe in, eventually is transported via blood. It will diffuse to the mitochondria and throughout the body. And that complex grabs oxygen and brings these electrons to the oxygen, and then oxygen becomes really electrically charged, negatively charged, so it's really reactive, and it reacts with hydrogen ions, those positively charged hydrogen atoms, and creates water. So we breathe in oxygen to create water is the final outcome, and that's the end of the story for the electrons. But what did those electrons do then? How do we get to the ATP? Well, here's the super interesting part. Remember, I told you all these complexes, when they have these metal centers that can capture electrons for a brief period of time. Well, when electrons interact with these metal ions, because it's negatively charged, it locally affects the electric charge distribution, and it's powerful enough that it shifts the conformation of the proteins of these complexes. So they literally move. Part of it moves, and now that movement allows to do something very special. It grabs hydrogen ion from inside the mitochondrial inner membrane, and the 3 of these 4 complexes put out those hydrogen ions outside. And as a consequence, you create a gradient. You create a double gradient. You create a chemical gradient, because now you have more hydrogen ions on the outside of the inner mitochondrial membrane than on the inside. That's number 1. And because remember, I told you these hydrogen ions, these protons, are positively charged. Now you have more positive charge on the outside of the inner mitochondrial membrane than on the inside. And nature likes equilibrium. So these positively charged hydrogen atoms really want to get back inside, back into the matrix of mitochondria, inside the inner membrane of mitochondria. And the molecule that allows it is ATP synthase. So that complex now allows these hydrogen atoms to pass right through. And again, because hydrogen atoms also have specific charge, it influences the electrical charge distribution of that molecule, of that protein complex. And that is enough to create chemical reaction where you take ATP molecule, I believe adenosine diphosphate, so 2 phosphate molecules, and another phosphate atom, and you put them together and you create ATP, adenosine triphosphate. And that's the molecule that now
is important for life. And that's how mitochondria is the powerhouse. Now, why are ATPs so important for life and why are they so special? Why they're energy molecules? Because phosphates themselves that are linked together, there's 3 of them in a row, they are themselves very negatively charged. So you have a lot of this negative charge packed close together and it repels each other. Negative charge is attracted to positive charge and suddenly you have all this negative charge. So ATP really, really wants to break down, dissociate. And because of that, it can easily participate in such a chemical reaction. And that's how, when it does that, again, it imparts certain electrostatic change wherever it's used. And that itself can be used in order to create a certain change, biological change somewhere else. And that's why ATP molecules are the molecules of life, because they can be used to create reactions and so on. All right. So that's the background you needed in order for me to now tell you how near-infrared light is beneficial here. But before I go on, actually, one more thing that I'll mention reactive oxygen species. And the reason why I want to mention that is because that will introduce final molecule that will explain why near-infrared light is so beneficial for us. And remember, I told you that
oxygen is eventually is combined with hydrogen ions because electrons are attached to oxygen and you create water molecule. Well, sometimes this doesn't happen properly. You don't attach 4 electrons. You attach fewer than that. And instead of oxygen participating in a reaction that creates water, instead what happens is you create a reactive oxygen species that is highly chemically reactive. So what happens, and as a consequence, that can cause a lot of damage. We can use reactive oxygen species to our benefit for example, immune defenses, but if you produce it in the wrong place and too much of it, it can start reacting with our biological components and as a consequence start destroying things. That's why, and that's what's referred to as oxidative stress, and this is why that is dangerous to us and why it's negative if you have too much of it. Now, why do I bring this? Is because there's a number of reasons why this process happens. For example, there's a backlog of electrons in this electron transport chain because, for example, you could have too many of those NADH or FADH2 molecules available and participating in the process. Another reason could be because that gradient of hydrogen ion atoms is not proper. There's not enough for them to move from inside of the inner membrane of mitochondria to the outside. Could be another reason. And a final one is that this complex 4, the cytochrome C oxidase that puts electrons to the oxygen, its function itself can be affected so that it doesn't do proper function. So this can be done by certain toxins or drugs where it blocks this proper interaction, or, and this is where I'm finally going to introduce the final key player in the story, or it can be occupied by nitric oxide. So nitric oxide is a gas bubble, I guess. It's a nitrogen and oxygen, and it can interact with that cytochrome C oxidase or complex 4 instead of oxygen, and as a consequence, it will block oxygen from properly entering that complex, and you can no longer perform this entire interaction that I've been describing. So nitric oxide, which has beneficial biological effects for us, sometimes that can be its negative impact because it can block this interaction, okay? And finally, we're going to explain how infrared light is beneficial. So remember, I told you that light is made out of photons. Photons are like pockets of energy, and they can be either absorbed or scattered by matter. So that's what can happen with near infrared light. and that cytochrome C oxidase or complex 4. This was discovered by this Russian female scientist, I believe her name was Tina Karu, in the mid-90s, and she was the first one to clue in that the wavelengths that we observed in photobiomodulation that bring health benefits to us are the same wavelengths that are absorbed by that cytochrome C oxidase or complex 4. And this has finally started the kind of the revolution of studying the science behind how near-infrared light might be of benefit to us. And what happens there is when the photon of near-infrared light hits the cytochrome C oxidase, it can impart that energy on the oxidase, and that metal complex ion can start to get excited and will wobble. It changes the electric charge distribution just enough that the nitric oxide, which is blocking the center of that complex, no longer fits there properly, and it gets kicked out. It dissociates, it is removed, and now it leaves room for oxygen to come back in, and everything can work properly. And that's the benefit of near-infrared light. So, two benefits at the same time. Number one is you clean up the cytochrome C oxidase or complex 4 so it properly can properly capture oxygen. So that's number one. And then this allows mitochondria to produce ATP. Mitochondria can work better. But number two, you also now make nitric oxide bioavailable, so it can do its own beneficial biological functions. And one example is, for example, nitric oxide. It can dilate your blood vessels, so that allows more oxygen to flow through the blood, right? It's used in proper function of neuronal cells and immune cells, so it has many beneficial effects. Now, when I think of nitric oxide, my first thing that comes to my mind is the vagus nerve. And the reason why is because many of you have mentioned this, that hey, one of the benefits of vagus nerve activation is nitric oxide. And I'll talk about this in another video on how nitric oxide in the vagus nerve might work together with photobiomodulation as an interesting symphony concert together. But that's a story for another video. But that's basically where my first real deep introduction to nitric oxide is from YouTube commenters. So that explains the benefits of photobiomodulation in the nutshell, and why near-infrared light is so good and positive for you, why you should spend time outdoors in the sun. But quantity matters. If there's too much exposure, eventually you can overpower the system. All right, I'm gonna wrap it up right here. And the reason why is because, well, there was no way around it. This had to be a longer video because of the complex background. I hope you liked it, and if you did like it, please like, subscribe. YouTube loves subscribers. YouTube reacts to subscribers as if it was near-infrared light hitting cytochrome C. That's how exciting it is. And leave a comment, and I learn lots from you in the comments. And also, please check out my Patreon account, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye, everyone.